record. Recording in progress. So let's go ahead and begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to the Jewish dietary laws. This is going to be an overview from most ancient times, really up to the very present. It's going to be very broad. We're not going to go into too much detail in everything, but have a sort of an enormous picture of where do these laws come from, what is the origination in biblical times, to how have they adapted over time, and what have been some of the controversies, particularly in America, over the issue of whether or not one should keep kosher. So these are all of the things on the table. I hope you will appreciate that the talk will be peppered with certain gems of fascinating little tidbits of Jewish history and Jewish practice throughout the ages. So I hope it is stimulating, intriguing, informative, enlightening, and let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to go share the screen so that we can, boom, there we go. Hopefully everyone can see a sign that says the laws of Kashrut, a text study. Unfortunately, I was having trouble with PowerPoint, so we're going to be using Microsoft Word, which is working fine. It just means things are going to scroll up instead of magically appearing before you, but you will get to see all the text and see them clearly. The laws of Kashrut, that Kashrut is the Hebrew word for the dietary laws, determining what is kosher and what is not kosher. So let us begin with the blessing for the study of Torah. All of you are here today to come and learn, but you are inadvertently or maybe intentionally, you are fulfilling a mitzvah. We are all commanded to study Torah, and we are going to be studying lots of words of Torah today, not just Torah, but also Mishnah and some of the medieval commentaries, maybe a little Talmud too. So, but definitely Torah and Mishnah today will be our focus. Let us say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, and which is in English, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with the commandments and commands us to engage in words of Torah. So we're going to start with the topic of clean and unclean species. Now, I know everyone's very, we're going to be interested in, what makes kosher meat kosher. We're going to be interested in the milk and meat and where does that come from. But we have to start with the fundamentals. And the fundamentals is really the emphasis of the Torah, which is what the Torah is primarily concerned with. Is the clean and unclean and not eating of the blood. And so let's start with the basic. The world is filled with species. And for Jews, all species on earth are divided into two, clean and unclean. And there's no in between. All life is divided into clean and unclean. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to begin with Genesis 1:29. When God created the world, God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food." Now, maybe we take this for granted. It's so basic, it doesn't even need to be said, but it's worth saying. All plants are kosher. All plants are kosher. Now, you can go to Aviva right now, where there's a controversy over broccoli. Why do you think there's a controversy over broccoli? I'll stop the share for a moment and see if anyone, if you know the answer, go ahead and unmute and can tell us.
I know the answer.
Well, who is it? And say your name and tell us why.
Lieberman. I believe the answer is because there are a lot of bugs that can be harbored in broccoli, and bugs are not kosher.
Correct. So bugs are not kosher except for one, and we'll get to what that one is later. Bugs are not kosher, and broccoli, you can't visually inspect it and see if there might be a bug. You know, a lettuce, you can turn it this way and that way and tell it is bug free, but broccoli, they could be hidden in there and someone could inadvertently be eating the broccoli. Now, here is why this is controversial. Well, first of all, anytime you have a bunch of Jews living in a building together and there's a policy made, is going to be controversial. So that's just an aside. But I think the real reason the broccoli is controversial is because it's a new thing. We live in a world right now where the Orthodox are becoming more and more Orthodox all the time. And it's like a piety competition among the Orthodox to be stricter and stricter. And it keeps getting stricter and stricter. No one gets more lenient. Everyone every sect and every denomination within Orthodoxy it keeps getting more and more strict, almost like competing with each other that we're more pious than you. And broccoli, you know, our grandparents ate broccoli. You know, they kept kosher, they ate broccoli. Our great-great-grandparents kept kosher and ate broccoli. 200 years ago, 400 years ago, they kept kosher and they ate broccoli. Rashi ate broccoli, you know, Maimonides ate broccoli. It's a new thing that broccoli is now forbidden. And the problem is at Aviva, there's old Jews and they've been around a long time. And they know that Jews have been eating broccoli a long time. But the rabbis who come to inspect the kitchen are younger rabbis who are following sort of the new mode of you can't have broccoli. And so there's a little bit of loggerheads over that issue. But the broccoli itself, of course, is kosher. All plants are kosher. Let's go back to our text. Where it gets controversial is the animal kingdom. So in the animal kingdom, some are kosher and some are not kosher. And where does this come from? It comes directly from the Torah. It comes from Leviticus chapter 11. And as we read this, we're going to read pretty much all of Leviticus chapter 11 because the whole chapter is filled with a division of species that we can eat and not eat. What we're going to look for is what does it say? And more importantly, what does it not say? What it says is a delineation of species that are permissible and not permissible. What it doesn't say is why. Let us go ahead and look at the text. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the people of Israel, saying, that preamble makes it clear that this is a command that is not just for the priests. There are certain obligations, and Leviticus is filled with them, that only apply to the priests. This is not one of those. This is to apply to the entire people. These are the beasts which you shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. So now we're dealing with land animals in this paragraph. So this is the paragraph of land. Later we'll deal with the fish and the swarming things and the birds, but this is the land animals paragraph. These are the beasts you shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, and chews the cud among the beasts, you shall eat. Okay, so it's basically saying you can eat everything that has a cloven hoof and chews its cud. But if it does one and not the other, no good. Nevertheless, you shall not eat of those that chew the cud or those that divide the hoof. The camel, for instance, because it chews the cud good, but its hoof is not parted, bad. You cannot eat camel. And the coney, which I looked up, is a type of rabbit, because it chews the cud, but its hoof is not parted, it's got a furry paw, it is unclean for you. And the hare similarly chews the cud, although I'm not even sure that's true, but its hoof is not parted, that we know is true, it is unclean for you. And the swine, though its hoof is parted, good hoof, it's cloven-footed, yet it chews not the cud, therefore cannot eat those baby back ribs. It is unclean to you. Of their flesh shall you not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. So you can't play pigskin. They are unclean to you. Let's pause for just a moment. We're going to open up the floor. I'm going to keep this screen on. Rivka Glatz, it says you had your hand up. Did you have a question? I don't know if we can even hear you. All right, there are so many people here today. I'm going to encourage you to use the raise hand feature, or just keep your hand up for a long time, because it takes me a minute to scan everybody. Barry Furman, did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hope you're not driving.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, good. No, very good. I'm glad. No, I wanted to make sure, because I have two questions, actually. The first question is, I read a great book by Steve Allen. It's a two-part series, The Great Steve Allen. And he wrote a book called Steve Allen on Religion, Morality, and the Bible. And he goes
Barry, if you got two questions, these got to be much snappier.
Okay, I will be snappier. So he asks in that book, why, when God gave these laws, did he not warn about
Barry, I'm afraid
poison mushrooms? So that was the first question I have.
Yeah.
Question is like a statement. I want you to know that when I bought mandel cuts.
Okay, Barry, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, Barry. We've got several other people with their hands up. So Barry, I got your first question there. Joni, let's get to your question, and then Ellen Klein.
So what is the logic in this paragraph?
All right, we'll get to the logic is it's dividing land animals into two types. And it's
right,
saying,
no, I get that. But if you go down a layer, why?
Yeah, that's what's missing.
Okay.
All right, we're going to explore that in just a minute, the why. Ellen Klein. Oh, you're muted, Ellen. Ellen, you're still muted.
I never knew that it was forbidden to touch the unclean animals, and I would have used that as a reason to give our son and why Jewish boys shouldn't play football. I said it was to honor his mother and father, and that didn't go well. He played football.
Well, I'm not sure he would have stopped playing football because of the carcass issue, because he would say, Mom, then why are you petting the dog or the cat? Who are also unclean animals. But I think you can touch unclean animals. So clearly they were touching camels. The point is just you're not even supposed to touch the meat. The carcass is unclean to you. So yeah, the pigskin football, kind of unkosher. But yes, Koziels, you have your hand up.
I understand that in the land of Israel, there are pig farmers. And from what I also understood is that the pigs are not supposed to be on the ground. So I think in Israel, the pigs are elevated on grates or on platforms, so they never touch the ground of Israel. Isn't that interesting?
Yes. So in Israel, there are pig farmers because there are pig eaters in Israel, most especially from the former Soviet Union that came over in the mass immigration in the 1990s. There were very few pig eaters in Israel prior to that. And so they would be like a specialty item, and you would have to, hunt it down to find a pork product in Israel prior to that mass immigration. But when hundreds of thousands of Jews from the former Soviet Union and non-Jews who were related to them came to Israel at that time, there was now a very large market for pork products in Israel. And so you have where there's demand, there's suppliers. And so but it is prohibited to have pigs in the state of Israel. So they are raised in elevated platforms so they do not touch the sacred land of Israel, not so that they could be kosher, but so that they can skirt the laws in Israel that prohibit raising them on the land. So they raise them above the land. And it's just one of those funny things. All righty, two of you, namely Barry and Joni, asked why, and I'm not going to say yet. So sorry about that, but we're going to get to the why once we get to all of the animals, and then we'll start to address the why. But let it be noted that nowhere does it say why the cow is permitted and the horse is forbidden. It just says their hooves have to be, it has to, these are the animals you can eat and these you can't. So now let's get to the skins, things that are in the water. This next paragraph, which is continuation, the same passage, addresses everything that lives in the water, whether it be the ocean or a stream or a lake. These you shall eat of all that are in the waters. Whatever has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas and the rivers, those you shall eat. And all that have not fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers and all that move in the waters, and of all any living thing which is in the waters, they shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat of their flesh. You shall not have their carcass. It's an abomination. Whatever has no fins nor scales in the waters, that shall be an abomination to you. So to clarify, if something lives in the water, it must have two things, fins and scales. As it turns out, fins is irrelevant because all species that have scales also have fins, but there are plenty of species that have fins and no scales. The first riddle to ask you is, think of some species that have fins but no scales. So what species have fins and no scales? And Shari, go ahead and name one.
Sharks.
Sharks is a winner. So sharks are not kosher. Art Zippin and then Roz Klein. Oh, you have to unmute.
Go ahead. Porpoise.
Correct. All of the mammals that live in the water are not kosher. Was that the same thing, Roz Klein? Yes, well done. Sue Goldberg, what?
What about swordfish? Where does that fit in?
Swordfish is the controversial fish.
Yeah.
So why is swordfish controversial? Because in its juvenile state, it's born with scales, but it sheds its scales in its maturation. So an adult swordfish will be scaleless. But most rabbis, including this one, say it's a scaled animal. It doesn't matter that it doesn't have scales in that moment. I mean, like if you took a cod and cut its fins off, it's still a finned animal. It's still a kosher animal just because so it's still a scaled animal. And most rabbis regard it as kosher, including me.
How about the manatee?
Any mammal that is not kosher.
It's a mammal, that's right.
Yeah, any mammal is not kosher. So some that were not mentioned here, many of the Japanese delicacies, octopus. Oh no, they don't have fins, but but you can't eat them. But catfish has scales. I mean, has fins but no scales. So these are the things that are forbidden. And of course, and most famously, all shellfish has neither scales nor fins and is forbidden. Same with the eel and the squid and the octopus. All of those things are forbidden to us. Let us go on with the list before we address the why, unless there's questions about the fish. So now we get to the birds. This is interesting about the birds. Here it differs. In the previous species by type, land animals and then watery animals, it gave them categories. It's different with birds. With birds, it's a list. It says, and these are they which you shall have in abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten, they're an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the buzzard, every raven, owl, falcon, gull, sparrow, little owl, cormorant, and the great owl, and the barn owl, and pelican, and the buzzard, and the stork, and the heron, and the hoopie, and the bat. So, of course, biologists are bristling by this list because one of them is not a bird, but is in the category of winged creatures that fly. And that, of course, is the bat at the end. So it's a list of birds that can't fly. Now, later, the rabbis in the Talmud, I didn't include the passage. In fact, I just cut it this morning because we had so much to study. Will say that they'll categorize it. They'll say any bird of prey is forbidden. And anyone that captures food in its, and holds its food in its talons is forbidden. Because, there's a few related species that are like these lists, but are not quite the same. So they give this categorization. So you can't eat any kind of, raptor, and so forth. Any questions about the birds? All right. Now we get to insects. Oh, let's do the riddle before I get there. I said all insects are forbidden except for one. Does anybody know what insect you're allowed to eat? Go ahead and unmute and say it if you know it.
Locusts.
Locust is correct. The locust.
How do you know these things? Because I read about it before.
So basically, all amphibians you cannot eat. Flying, creeping things on all fours, you can't eat. But you can eat the locust, and pretty much any locust or cricket, that whole genre of animal, you can eat. And it doesn't say why, but I have a theory here. And then we'll get to the question of why of all of these. So why locust? Does anyone have a theory? I mean, I have a theory, but again, it doesn't say why you can eat locusts. But anyone want to guess why?
I would guess that the locust decimated the crops and they were plentiful. And if you had a famine, or if you had famine because of locusts, then you might as well eat them.
Yeah, Roz, you were starting to talk too. Do you want to go?
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
And I feel the same way too. I remember vividly when I was a kid and was assigned to read the book Things Fall Apart about the author's childhood in Africa. And when the locusts came to his village, they all went running out with bags and captured as many locusts they could eat, because for the next couple months, that was the only thing that would be available to eat. And the locusts just came through, and in 2 days, you had to grab as many locusts you could have, or otherwise you would starve. my guess is that's why you have to, if you can't allow locusts, your people will starve. That would be my guess. But again, we don't know. So now Barry asked and Joni asked, and I will keep you waiting no longer. Why are certain animals kosher and certain animals not kosher? The answer, the only true answer is we don't know. We can't know because it doesn't say. You just read everything that the Torah says about clean and unclean species. It doesn't say why. So everything that we're about to say now is speculation, is theory. There are some theories that are proffered that I think are nonsense. One of the theories is that it's a health and safety protocol. Now, Barry started to allude to this before his internet gave out and his voice got a little warbly, that there are poisonous fruits and vegetables, and why aren't those forbidden? And the answer is, this is not a health and safety protocol list. It's not that pork is dangerous to eat because it's got, certain, you can get sick from it. Pork is not an especially dangerous meat. People all over the earth eat pork and they're doing fine. It's that some animals are gross and some animals seem proper to eat. And the reason I believe, and frankly, most scholars of the Bible and ancient Israel and throughout the ancient world, and anthropologists generally would argue with me on this, is that this is about protocols. It's about it's about cultural norms and fitting into a group that has certain cultural norms. Let me give an example. Let me give a scenario. Imagine your congregation and you decide you're going to help out with a refugee crisis and you're going to settle a group of people into Sarasota. And you wanted to, help them out, and you wanted to tell them certain things to do and not do so that they would fit in and not cause a scandal among their neighbors and not, so that they can make friends and, take part in public society and just kind of fit in Sarasota. And you would tell them, we eat chicken, we eat cow, we don't eat horse. You might be accustomed to eating horse, but if you invite people over and serve them horse, that will not go over well. And this friend from this foreign country will say, my goodness, why? Why do you eat a cow and not a horse? And you will say, because that's what we do. There's no reason to eat cow and not horse. How can you articulate a distinction between a cow and a horse that one is proper to eat and one isn't? So they'll say, okay, I'll take your word for it. No horse. But I'm sure they're going to love my rat lasagna. No, don't serve rat lasagna. Okay, dog lasagna? No, you can't serve that. Why not dog lasagna? You're saying dogs are, dogs are not clean? They're in every home here. I assume everybody's eating dogs. There's a certain cultural norm. And the Torah is saying, these are our norms. This is what we do. And to deviate from this is disgusting. It's unrefined. It's animalistic. It's pagan. It's not what proper Israelites do. Is that exactly what's going on here? I can say with confidence, but not with absolute surety. But I believe it's the best way to understand why Leviticus 11. It's as if we were creating a list for refugees who are trying to fit into Sarasota of basic protocols. This is what it is to be an Israelite. This is what our group does. We eat this and we don't eat that. And rats are disgusting. And, and eating lizards is disgusting. It's an abomination. Don't do it. You're not one of us if you do. All right. So now I hope I addressed some of those questions there. We're opening up the floor for hands raised. Sue Goldberg, I see your hand up.
Aren't there also pots of those animals which we do eat and pots that we don't eat? We don't eat every pot.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we're only on species that are permitted and forbidden.
Okay.
We'll get there. Barry Furman.
Yeah, Rabbi, my internet went out just when you were answering my question about why we don't have a prohibition against eating poison berries. My internet went out there, and I wonder if you gave an answer to that.
It's because it's not about health and safety. This list is unconcerned about health and safety. It's about propriety.
Okay. Thank you.
Lita Katzer, and then the Koziels.
It isn't part of the explanation that God, in a sense, it was kind of arbitrary, that God wanted to have us think about what we're eating and make the act of eating holy rather than just sitting down and have whatever is in front of you.
Lita, you always do this to me. You do this every week at Torah study. You always get to the point I'm getting to at the end in this grand climax, and then you jump in with it. You always know where we're going before we get there.
Well,
No, it's just because you're remarkably insightful and you're in my head. Lita, we are going to get there. We're going to look at Samson Raphael Hirsch and other rabbis who are going to make the point exactly what you're making about the spirituality of kashrut, but not yet. We're still on animals that you can eat and not eat. Koziels.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you call it societal, that you think it's societal norms, yet they went to the degree of classifying things with cud and no cud and hooves and so on and so forth. So it seems like there must have been, to me, there's some rationale as to why they would have divided it into these classifications. But
yes, but the rationale escapes us. It wasn't given.
Yeah.
They just said so. Most of the Torah, most of the time, it just says so. It doesn't give reasoning. Very seldom does it give a reasoning for a mitzvah. It just says so. And this is the case, and it's a frustration. But alas, this is our Torah, and this is how it came. So let us move on to our next subjects then, because all we've done so far is look at clean and unclean animals. And I want us to look at the end of Leviticus 11, because it gives us a little bit of sense of why. It says, "For I am the Lord your God. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any manner of swarming things that move upon the earth." And here it's talking about, not eating snakes and lizards and stuff like that. And look at the language here, and you can see definitively it's not about safety. It's not about health issues. It's about what is disgusting and debasing, and it's about holiness. And if we're going to be a holy nation, God's chosen, we can't be doing things that defile us. And eating lizards and snakes is disgusting, and it defiles us, and you can't do it. Even if you think it tastes good, even if you just came back from France and you're like, I want to eat frogs. No, it's defiling, and God needs better of us. That's what this is about. It's about holding ourselves up to a higher standard of purity. Now I'm going to come to another riddle for you. This is a riddle that I believe I've invented, and I have put it to many other rabbis, and no one had ever heard it before. So I think it's a complete Hiddush, as they say in Jewish study, a new thing. So here's my riddle for you. And if you know the answer, don't blurt it out. We're just going to let everybody sit on this riddle. The Talmud says, for that which goes forth from the unclean is unclean, and that which goes forth from the clean is clean. So what this is referring to is the products that animals make. Say, eggs. Can you eat a vulture egg? And the Talmud says, no, you cannot eat a vulture egg. A vulture egg comes from an unclean animal, and therefore it is unclean. So you can't eat, can you drink pig's milk? No, it's milk from an unclean animal, therefore you can't drink that milk, okay? So that's the Talmud. So here's my riddle for you, don't blurt it out. There are two exceptions to this rule. There is issue from an unclean, non-kosher animal that we Jews are permitted to ingest. So there's two exceptions to this rule. So the riddle for you is, can we as a group, don't blurt it out yet, what comes from an animal that you're not allowed to eat, but it's issue you can eat? Okay, I'm not going to call on you yet, but when we come to calling on people, Barbie and then Joanne. All right, we're going to give you 20 more seconds to think of it. Okay, Barbie, you get the first crack. What's your guess?
Mother's milk and honey.
What? You took
Oh, I wasn't supposed to. I learned the honey in the class that we had before, and the mother's milk I guessed in that class when you asked it.
So, that's so unfair.
But I did the mother's milk one on my own. I thought that one, the honey I learned from you.
The answer to the riddle is mother's milk, because you're not allowed to eat humans, but babies are allowed to eat mother's milk, and bee honey. Bees, being insects that are not locusts, are not kosher, but the honey that they produce is allowed. So that's our riddle. We're going to get back to our text now. Unclean. All righty. So someone asked a little bit while ago, I understand there's parts of the meat you can eat and parts that you cannot eat. We're going to get to that category here. Certain meat of an animal that is kosher, sometimes that meat is kosher and sometimes it's not. So let's go back to the cows. Cows are kosher, but intuitively that some beef is kosher and some beef is not. So what distinguishes kosher meat from unkosher meat? And there's several things, but one is fundamental, and that is no blood. I have an excerpt here from Deuteronomy 12, but I could have given you a dozen excerpts, one from every book of the Torah that says you may not eat blood. Here from Deuteronomy. But make sure you do not partake of the blood, for the blood is the life, and you must not consume the life with the flesh. You must not partake of it. You must pour it out on the ground like water. Which is why what makes meat from a kosher animal kosher is first, it has to be slaughtered according to certain protocols. It has to be killed instantly with a slice of a perfect knife without any blemish or nick across the throat. But most importantly, it has to be drained of blood. So if you go to a kosher slaughterhouse, or you will see, and then a kosher butcher, the way the animal is prepared is not only is it slaughtered the appropriate way, but then it is hung by its hind legs with its head decapitated. It's hung by its hind legs, so all of the blood would drain out the neck. And then after the meat is cut into steaks, it is then salted, and with special care of salt to be put over the ends of any blood vessels to draw out and pull out any of the blood that might be tucked into the tissue inside. Kosher salt is not kosher. All salt is kosher. It should be called koshering salt. Kosher salt is a sort of a perversion of an English. It doesn't capture the Yiddish or the Hebrew properly. It should have been called koshering salt. It's the salt that's used to make meat properly prepared so it can be kosher, and that is to remove its blood. In addition, there's one part of the kosher animal that cannot be eaten. I'll go ahead and invite anyone to unmute. Can you name what part of a kosher animal besides its blood you're not allowed to eat? An extra point if you can say why.
The shin, something about Joseph or somebody where an angel hit his shin.
Barry, you are close on both. It's not the shin, but it's close, and it wasn't close. Joseph, but it's close. Anyone else know? Yeah, Harvey, I think you had your hand up, and then Ruth.
Yeah, it's the hip, and it's because it was the joint that was affected in Jacob's struggle with the angel.
Yes, you got it. So Barry, you were so close on both. You were off by just a few inches in one generation. But yes, Ruth, do you have your hand up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The hind quarter altogether, because most of the blood vessels are in the hind quarter, and it's almost impossible to really kosher that meat completely.
Okay, so Ruth is also right. The answer I was looking for is what Harvey said. The hip socket is absolutely forbidden. The Torah says so in Genesis after Jacob wrestles with the angel and his hip was joined on a socket. It says, and you shall not eat any, of the hip. But what Ruth is saying is a practical truth, which is what do we call that cut of meat, the hind quarter? It's like
sirloin.
Sirloin. You will not find a kosher butcher offering it because they feel they're incapable of removing its blood enough. But it's not inherently forbidden, it's just practically forbidden. All right, so let's move on because I feel like we have the most interesting stuff still ahead. All right. Barbie Coleman's asked before we get here, why can't we eat chicken with dairy in the same meal? And that's what we're going to address here now. So milk and meat is forbidden here. Hold on a second, I'm just going to fix that. Okay, so milk and meat, where does this come from? It starts with this little commandment, super short, out of nowhere, unexplained. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk, a kid, specifically a baby goat. You may not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Why is this here? We have, I'm going to say we have no idea. We have some idea. We cannot say for sure. It is not, it's not listed in context to give us any idea of what it means or why. It's suggestive that it was some kind of Canaanite practice, probably some kind of cultic ritual practice where they would boil a baby kid in its own mother's milk. And that was considered abhorrent to our Israelite ancestors. And they're like, no, you can't do that. That's like inhumane, and it's gross, and it's something idolatrous practice that we shouldn't be copying. Just don't do it. And that's it. That's all the Torah says. So from this, we get that you cannot boil a baby goat in any goat milk. You cannot boil a baby goat in any milk of any species. You cannot boil kosher meat of any species in the milk of any species. You cannot eat in the same meal a hamburger and then wash it down with a glass of milk. You cannot even have a plate that yesterday ate meat and today you're eating a grilled cheese sandwich on it. Where on earth did the separate dishes and separation of milk and meat all come from this? And here, friends, we have to go back a second and learn about the rabbinic mind and the Jewish way of thinking. There is a concept in rabbinic Judaism called building a fence around the Torah. And what that means is, if the Torah says, don't do this, and this is a sin, what they're saying is, don't come close to doing that. Build a fence around that so that you don't almost do it. It's like a cliff. You don't want to stand at the edge of a cliff. Like you go to, Grand Canyon or some dramatic cliff, like you want to go see it, and you want to get near the edge, but how close to that cliff edge are you going to get? 10 feet? Or are you like 20 feet's good enough for me? I can see the canyon. I don't need to get any closer than 20 feet from certain death. And then someone is going to say, you know what? Well, let's build a fence so that no one gets any closer, to certain death. And the rabbis looked at the mitzvot as so important that, like, as if it was certain death, that you wanted to get no close to it. But I think there's more going on than that. I think there's also a bit of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which Jews might be more neurotic than other people, maybe. I don't know. I don't know other people as well as I know Jews, and Jews can get fixated. It might have something to do with machismo, or sort of what I talked about earlier with the broccoli, sort of the competition to be more and more pious. throughout different eras of Jewish tradition, we have seen Jews get more and more. It happens in every culture that, if a dress, people can get more and more and more elaborate to sort of show off, that they're either more pious or they're more wealthy or whatever, that maybe some of these rules got more and more strict just because Jews wanted to sort of show off how much more careful, how farther away from the cliff edge at the Grand Canyon they're going to get because, look, I'm more safe than you. We see it a little bit during the pandemic. Some of it is, people just being careful, but we all know someone whose level of care is beyond just public health and safety. Some people have gone meshuggah. By the way, we can define everyone is meshuggah is because they're more careful than you. That therefore they're meshuggah, or if anyone who's less careful than you, they're reckless. So that's how we define, everybody. But, we all know someone who's gone, I think some of the kosher laws are a little bit about, just people going, more and more and more. And that's where we get that you can't have Barbie Coleman's question prior to the class that she asked is, why can't we have chicken Parmesan? Why can't we have cheese on chicken? Chicken doesn't make milk. I promise you, you're not boiling a chicken in its own mother's milk. And it's because lest you get in the habit of boiling meat in milk, even though it's chicken, you're making a chicken soup with milk in it, unless you accidentally get in the habit, you might drop some meat in some milk soup, and therefore you would violate this commandment. And so it's about being extra, extra careful. We see a lot of this in the Passover laws too, like what makes shomer matzah. Shomer matzah is that the wheat doesn't even touch water during the last days before it's harvested. If it rains, you can't harvest the wheat for a certain period of time to make it shomer matzah. It's just about going to extremes of extrems. And that seems to be what's going on here with why we have separate dishes. But let's look at one thing about the text here, and we'll see, and then we'll open up the floor on this. I want us to look at a Mishnah passage because it's interesting. The Mishnah says, and this is going to get ultimately the question we're going to say at the end of our session is, what should be the temple's policy? If you step into a temple event, God willing, sometime soon we'll go to a temple event and there'll be a buffet and a dinner. What do you think is appropriate to be at a temple menu, and what would be really inappropriate? This Mishnah is interesting when it comes to that. You can see some of the development of these laws. The Mishnah is from the year 200. So it's 1800 years old. No flesh may be cooked in milk except the flesh of fish and locusts. All right, so we'll start right there. Barbie, your question, why can't I eat chicken and milk? Well, for at least 1800 years, our Jews have not been eating chicken and milk. Just fish and locusts can be cooked in milk. And no flesh may be served upon the table together with cheese, except the flesh of fish and locusts. So you cannot have a table at your dining room table. You're sitting down with your family of four, say, and you put some platters on the table. You cannot have any meat and dairy at the table at the same time. And then comes the controversy. A fowl may be placed upon the table together with cheese, but may not be eaten with it, according to the school of Shammai. So at your dining room table, with say a table for 4, it's you and 3 guests, or you and a spouse and 2 kids, or what, let's just say your dining room table. According to the school of Shammai, Hillel and Shammai always argued. Now, interestingly, Shammai was almost always the strict one and Hillel the lenient. But Shammai says at your dinner table, you can have a steak and you can have cheese. And your guests at the table, one can eat the steak and one can eat the cheese, but it's okay to have it at the same table and let those choose to eat what they choose. The school of Hillel says it may neither be placed upon the table together with the cheese nor eaten with it. And Rabbi Yossi remarked, this is an instance where the school of Shammai adopts the lenient ruling and Hillel the strict ruling. It's a rare exception where it's flip-flopped. But then comes the interesting thing. Of what table did they speak? Of the table in which one eats. That's why I kept saying your dining room table. But on the table where the food is set out, i.e., a buffet table, one may, without any hesitation, place one beside the other, meat and milk beside each other. So the Mishnah in the year 200 makes it clear that at a buffet, a Jewish buffet serving kosher, Jewish kosher food to kosher Jews, you can have at the buffet table milk and meat, but any individual Jew has to take one or the other. Got it? That's it. I thought that was interesting in terms of what should be a temple's policy. I'm going to pause for a moment now. And what the subject we're about to get to is why Kashrut is important and sacred, and why the early Jews in America rejected it. So that's what's next. Any questions? We'll stop here about milk and meat or anything before we go on. All right. Yes, Roz.
Well, for starters, I remember asking that question about milk and chicken to my grandfather. And he said, because a chicken that is dead represents death and milk represents life, and you cannot have them both together. That was his philosophy.
And I believe it's true in spirit, but it's not true. Why can you have fish chowder?
It doesn't make sense.
Right. Fish chowder, unfortunately, denies delicious, but unfortunately, it creates punctures a hole in that argument.
The other thing I wanted to mention was my thought on possibly Rabbi Shammai's thinking was, you don't know what the person had eaten before. So if you put out a buffet, the one who who is eating milkshakes can find something to eat, and the one who had eaten a hamburger earlier in the day can also find something to eat. Possibly.
Yes, but one thing I want to point out of interest in the Mishnah passage is you can see that Judaism has only gotten stricter. So the time of the Mishnah, I mean, here the teachings are Hillel, Shammai, Akiva, Rav. These are the greatest rabbis of our, of our tradition. And if they had invited today's Orthodox rabbis to their home, the Orthodox rabbis would say, like, well, your home's not kosher and I can't eat with you. I'm just saying that Judaism has gone stricter and stricter, even from, the Mishnah upon which the Talmud is based, and all of, Jewish practice is based on the Talmud, which is based on the Mishnah, which is based on the Torah. It just keeps getting stricter. There's only one direction things go unless there's a total revolution, such as reform. The Lida.
Well, in kosher slaughtering, all the blood is drained from the meat. But if you are eating a piece of kosher meat that is rare, is that considered something you should not be doing?
Right, it's weird because it's not like if it's rare, you just see the blood easier. If it's cooked, the blood's still there. So it's not a matter of how well it's done. But the question is, even after you've made all of this big effort to remove the blood, and then it's served on your plate, and at the very end, a little bit more blood comes out. Like, it seems that you should try to avoid it, that little bit of blood. But you just do your best you can. You can't remove all blood. You just try your best to drain and salt. Janet Hiller.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the amount of time in between eating milk and meat. I was raised in a kosher home. Now I'm vegan, so it's irrelevant, but I have a lot of friends and, family who are kosher. And I know in my house, it was half hour or an hour. There was always a dispute. How much time do you have to wait before you have your meat and your milk, and which do you eat first and which do you eat later? And I was just curious where that came from and if you know anything about that.
It's the same principle. It's more fences around the Torah. Like, it's one thing you don't boil it and then you don't eat it together, and then you also keep time. And you'll note that among the Orthodox, they take more time after eating meat before they eat dairy, and less time after eating dairy to eat meat, because there might be meat caught in your teeth, or it takes longer to digest, and so forth. It's just getting more and more strict. But I would ask you, vegan, would you cook tofu in soy milk?
No, I wouldn't cook tofu. Well, you can. I mean, we don't have any problem with it, but sure.
But you can't cook tofu in its own mother's milk.
Oh, yeah, well, you can. I guess you can look at it that way.
We don't need anything with a mother.
Yeah, right.
I'm just teasing. Come on, you're right. So, all right. Nigel, it is your turn. And then Diane.
Just one technical point, talking about rare meat. Most of what you see is not blood. It's another protein called myoglobin. It's not blood. It's a decomposition from the muscle fibers that we eat. We're eating muscle fiber is what most of our meat is, and that is myoglobin, which is a protein cousin of hemoglobin, but it is not blood.
Thank you.
Get technical.
Who answered
Diane Arch.
I just wanted to say that during this past Thanksgiving, my granddaughter, who's 12 and goes to a Jewish day school, said that she couldn't eat the cranberry cheesecake after the turkey unless she waited 2 hours. Is that simply arbitrary? Is that just a rule that she learned and that only people in Denver keep? I don't know.
No. That is a common practice among Orthodox Jews to wait between eating milk and meat, waiting longer after meat and shorter after dairy.
So that's typical, you're saying.
It is not a Denver tradition. It is typical among Orthodox Jews. Ellen Zippin and then Betty Crane.
When I was growing up, I was not raised in a kosher home. When I was growing up, that was a difficult position. Most people were conservative or claimed to be, and were very negative towards people who did not keep kosher. My mother, who was not outspoken the way I am, she was a shy, retiring kind of woman, said at a dinner table where everybody was down, saying bad things about Reform Jews who ate whatever they wanted. My mother said, we Reform Jews are more concerned with what comes out of our mouths than with what goes in. And I thought that was really, that was my keystone.
All right, we're about to get there, and hold on to that comment, because that underscores one of the two major reasons why Reform rejected Kashrut. And we're going to see that articulated by leading Reform, rabbis and opinion makers, but probably not stated as clearly as your mother did. Betty Crane, it's your turn.
Okay, just two comments. My father was Orthodox, so growing up, I did not know what a cheeseburger was, or shrimp or lobster or anything like that. In relation to what Janet said, I belong and still belong to a conservative synagogue up north. And I know you asked about the time element between when you can, have milk or whatever, or dairy after meat. At the very beginning, when I joined the synagogue, it was only an hour wait on services. Friday night began at 8 o'clock. And then we had an interim rabbi, because our rabbi retired, and he decided to change it to 3 hours, which meant that at the Friday night we could only serve parv cake, which was more difficult to find than the regular parv cake and fruit. That was it.
Right. And again, it's another example. We'll find 100 examples of everything gets stricter over time, not more lenient. Maybe you'll find one example of it getting more lenient over time. It only gets more strict, adding on, unless there's a revolution to topple the system. Susie Morris, please go ahead and unmute. It'll be your turn.
Yeah, I have a question which I don't understand. I know you have to have 2 sets of dishes if you keep the kosher. But I understand if you have glass dishes, it doesn't make any difference. Then you don't have to have 2 sets of dishes. Why the difference?
I believe the reason is, and same with also that glass utensils and dishes they're much easier to render kosher again if like pork accidentally touches them or something, is because they're considered non-porous, that nothing sticks to them in the physically or spiritual realm. And so that you can just a simple cleaning of them is sufficient. You don't, and that's it. Because yes, Sue, your hand's up.
Yes, it was my understanding, and we grew up Reform and kosher, but that things like steak needed to be broiled, that they could never be fried because the broiling koshered it. Is that not correct? That you couldn't have fried liver, you had broiled liver.
I have not heard that, so I couldn't speak to it.
Oh.
The Hillers have their hand up. Did you want to? No, you're good. Okay. All right, guys, I want to get back to the text because we're pushing at the end of time here. And we have not gotten to some of the key components that we need to get to. So let's talk about the significance of Kashrut. In the book of Maccabees, Kashrut became the symbolic ritual act upon which the fight with Antiochus was over. And in the books of Maccabees, it talks about the Hellenizers would force Jews to eat pork as a way of showing their loyalty to the new regime. And the book of Maccabees says, many of the people of Israel adhered to the law of the Lord. They would not eat unclean things and chose rather to die. And part of the emphasis on the dietary laws in Jewish tradition over the thousands of years has been because it has been symbolic of our particularness. We have been unique in these dietary laws, and it set us apart, and it's become a source of pride. It was for the Maccabees, but it's also for anyone who ever reads the books of Maccabees or reads about the Maccabees. So the FedEx is here and they're ringing the bell and hitting the door, pushing, and I'm getting distracted. But I'm not going. They're just gonna have to leave the package there. So many of the people of Israel adhere to the laws of the Lord. Okay, so not eating pork, it's interesting. My principal rabbi, the rabbi I most love and was most shaped by, was Sam Carve. And he, when speaking about Kashrut, said something that was not unique to him, but it was something he believed in firmly. He said, shrimp is not kosher, but pork is anti-Semitic. And what he meant by that is it's no big deal. Yeah, so you eat some shrimp or you eat clams, whatever. But pork is symbolic of something much bigger. And it has a weight to it that's beyond the mitzvot of holiness. It has to do with our people and who we are and what we stand for. And I always thought that was an interesting phrasing. But it's substantiated by the book of Maccabees. The Midrash in Genesis Rabbah, I want to share this passage. For what does the Holy One, blessed be God, care whether a man kills an animal by the throat or by the nape of its neck? Hence, its purpose, the dietary laws, is to refine human beings. Is that we don't need to necessarily know why we have to do this and not do that, but it's just enough that there are rules. And if there's rules, then we become refined. We are not like the animals. We are sophisticated. And rules and customs make us sophisticated. Abraham ibn Ezra says in the 12th century, I believe it's a matter of cruelty to boil a kid in its mother's milk. He adds the component that the laws of Kashrut are about morality. Killing an animal in a certain way is more humane, or boiling a kid in its mother's milk is inhumane. And that the Jewish dietary laws are about moral treatment of animals. It's from this train of thought that many modern Jews have chosen vegetarianism or veganism as a Jewish value and said it's a carrying on of a tradition which began with looking at the moral treatment of animals and taking it to its natural end. And the last passage I want to share in support of Kashrut comes from Samson Raphael Hirsch. He says, anything which gives the body too much independence or makes it too active in a carnal direction brings it nearer to the animal sphere, thereby robbing it of its primary function, to be the intermediary between the soul of man and the world outside. And here, I believe, he is articulating the point that Lita Katzer made earlier, that it's about a spirituality. It's about elevating ourselves to a higher plane. It's not just a matter of what we eat or following an old rule, but it's about distinguishing ourselves from our most base instincts, from the animals around us, about being refined, because we humans are uniquely part animal, part angel, part divine, created in the image of God, and we need to act that way. So here you find a number of statements and reasons for us to consider keeping kosher, to be more refined, to have our, attach ourselves to the identity of our people all these thousands of years. But let's look at a different side of the coin. And that is the earliest Jews in America flat out rejected Kashrut. So let me just start with a little bit of a history lesson. The first century of American Judaism, the first century of America, from say the 1770s to the 1780s, there were not denominations here in America. There was no such thing as conservative Judaism anywhere, by the way. There was reform burgeoning in Europe, but not really toward the end of this period, But in America, Jews were Jews, and an American Judaism developed. And the American Judaism was one that, well, it'll grow into become Reform Judaism. But at the time, they didn't see themselves as rebels. They didn't see themselves as reformers necessarily, but they saw themselves as crafting a Judaism that was appropriate for the new world. And in this new frontier world, American Jews saw this as a new Palestine, a new Jerusalem, that here for the first time we were considered citizens. America was the first country in the world that gave Jews citizenship. It was a messianic utopian ideal here in America, and the Jews in America reflected it. One of the things that they did is they stopped keeping kosher because they felt it prevented them from being proper Americans. And it kept a barrier between them and their Christian neighbors. It prevented them from being embraced into the greater society, or rather embracing it. If you couldn't eat at your neighbor's house or couldn't take part in civic meals, then you weren't part of the civic society. And here America gave them citizenship, the first country in the world to do so. It was improper to have this barrier. In fact, it was un-Jewish, because Judaism in its values taught about humanity. It taught about participation in the greater world and not only caring about our own. And therefore, these kosher laws were anachronistic and archaic, and they prevented us from being fully actualized Jews. And a fully actualized Jew takes part in civic life in America. If you didn't, you were a lesser Jew. And so the Jews of America, by and large, did not keep kosher in the 1770s right through the 1780s and the big wave of Eastern European immigration. The Jews of America, primarily of German descent, German Jewish descent, didn't keep kosher. And so a very famous incident occurred, and that was called the Trefa Banquet, which is what it came to be called. So the Hebrew Union College was founded to be the first seminary in America, not a Reformed seminary, just an American seminary for American Jews. It was founded in 1875 by Isaac Mayer Wise. All of your rabbis, the rabbis Glickman and Rabbi Shefrin, were graduates and ornees from the Hebrew Union College. It is the first and the oldest seminary in America. It was founded in Cincinnati. And in 1775, it was founded. And in 1883, they had their first ordination class. I think it was 5 rabbis. And it was a big ceremony, and they invited Jews from all over to take part in the first ordination. And it was a glorious event. And that night they went to the established fancy tavern in town for a banquet. And at the banquet, we have from the American Jewish Archives, the menu. I'm gonna make it even bigger so you can see it. Whoops, where did it go? Hold on, I just clicked the wrong button and lost it. Okay, here we go, here it is. I'm not gonna read it out loud. You can go ahead and see it for yourself. This is what was served at the banquet following the ordination that now, great legend was born over this banquet, and most of the legend is completely untrue. The legend is that those reformers in Cincinnati invited some Jews from New York and purposely to thumb their nose at the more traditionalists, served them, designed the most treifa meal they could think of that started with little neck clams and included crabs and shrimp. Like they tried to think of everything unkosher and make it the most unkosher meal possible. And on that day, conservative Judaism was born. Because they were so appalled by these Reform Jews. The truth is well, that's not quite true. So here's the problem with that. Research have shown, in fact, our scholar in residence who was here about 5 years ago was the one who did the research. He found menus from that establishment from events in the weeks before and the weeks after our event, Gentile events, and it was the same menu. So the menu wasn't crafted for the event. That's just what that tavern served for fancy events. Pretty much the same menu was served throughout that whole year at that same tavern. Second of all, conservative Judaism really would get founded several years later. It is true that there were 2 people who were in attendance who were offended, and they were from New York, and weeks later they wrote about it. But the legend is that half the people there stormed out of the room and founded conservative Judaism. But the truth is there was no controversy at the event. And people were taken aback that someone wrote about it weeks later. They're like, no one raised a fuss at the event. Everyone seemed quite happy and didn't even notice what was served. But it would lead to conservative Judaism in that the traditionalists that came from Eastern Europe in large number looked at Reform as, in American Judaism at the time, as having gone too far. And they wanted something in between. And that's really why conservative Judaism was born in America and thrived for so long and became the predominant modality of American Judaism in the 20th century. So that's the treifa banquet a little bit. Is there any questions or comments on the treifa banquet before we get to Reform view on Kashrut? All right, let's get back to it then. Let's shrink this down a little bit. And so here we're going to see, after the treifa banquet and the scandal that came from it, the Pittsburgh platform, which is the CCAR, famously in 1885, this is the Reform movement's body of rabbis. Here now, American Judaism is splitting between Reform and conservative. There's still very few Orthodox, not a meaningful number. The American Judaism is splitting between Reform and conservative, and the Reform movement makes their statement. And it is, that is, we hold all such Mosaic rabbinic laws as regarding diet, originated in ages and under the influence of ideas entirely foreign to our present mental and spiritual state. Just want to clarify that. They're saying that the laws of Kashrut are ancient, anachronistic things that are foreign to us. They don't relate to us. It says they're as ancient as animal sacrifice. They don't apply to us. They're as archaic as animal sacrifice. They fail to impress the modern Jew with the spirit of priestly holiness. And then here comes the kicker, which I love because I like a statement that's bold and not wishy-washy. Their observance, the dietary laws, their observance in our days is apt rather to obstruct than to further modern spiritual elevation. Thus, they distinguish themselves from the burgeoning conservative movement to say, if you keep kosher, you are less Jewishly observant than if you do. It's like saying, I'm more Jewish observant than you. I sacrifice animals instead of saying prayers. They're saying it is wrong. It's unrefined. We've passed it. Now to be a proper Jew is to reject these anachronistic laws. So, by the way, Reform movement has softened its stance since then, but that carried the day for a good about 75 years. Rabbi John D. Rayner, here's the one who I feel really well articulates what Ellen Zippin's mother said. In 1968, I believe he's British, he writes, the dietary laws lie on the borderline between those practices which are and those which are not intelligible and self-commending. Consequently, liberal Judaism leaves it to each individual whether to observe or not, according to his own judgment. Okay, so the Pittsburgh platform says, don't keep kosher. In 1968, John Rayner saying, keep kosher if you want, don't keep kosher if you want, it's fine. But here comes the kicker, Ellen Zippin's mom. After all, religion is not primarily concerned with eating habits. To create the impression that this is one of Judaism's chief preoccupations is to debase it in the eyes of Jews and non-Jews. Love that. Love it. And by the way, I love it for two reasons. I love that it takes a stand, that it's not wishy-washy, even though it says keep kosher or don't keep kosher, but don't think that this is what Judaism is all about. It is tertiary. It is way down the list of what's important in Judaism. The other reason that I love it is because I believe it absolutely. Even though I'm teaching a whole class on it today, I don't do it every day. So now, the last thing that we're going to do, we're really over time, but the last thing we're going to do is reflect on what should the temple's policy be? Not for a private function, say, but for a private function at temple, fine, a bar bat mitzvah, say, but at temple event, you know, the sisterhood and brotherhood are doing a Shabbat dinner. You sign up, you show up at the temple, and out on the table, what should they serve? What shouldn't be served? What would be too strict that would be improper for our temple? What would be too lenient that would be improper? What should our, you know, given that each of us are going to do our own thing, but when you come to the temple, so this was a challenge I put before our temple in 2007. I came here in 2006, and our temple policy is what I would describe by the Hebrew term balagan. Balagan means a mixed up mayhem of a mess. Basically, everybody would go around telling people what the temple's policy was and why they were wrong, whoever put out this meal. But the problem is no one agreed, and we searched and we could find no written temple policy. But if someone put out a meat and cheese lasagna, someone was going to tell them that's wrong. And if someone didn't put out a meat and cheese lasagna, someone was going to tell them that's wrong, that we're not kosher, but so like there was no policy. So I challenged the temple to finally come up with a policy, and they did in 2007. And I said, no, we're going to have a policy, but we're going to write it large, we're going to frame it, and we're going to hang it in the kitchen. And I'm pleased to tell you that it sits there to this very day. That the temple, we had a policy, we studied the text together, we had meetings about it, we had groups, we had debates about it, we came up with, the ritual committee made a suggestion and it went to the board, and we finally had a policy. But I ask you, not in the kitchen right now, and you can't look up at the policy, what ought it be? One thing I will tell you that's interesting, in 2007 when we did this, there were a number of people, I would say the majority of people, who ate pork and shellfish at home and in restaurants, but did not want to see it at their temple. Explain that one to your Gentile friends. So what should the temple policy be? Should you allow pork and shellfish to be served at the temple? And what about milk and meat? Should people be given the choice? If someone doesn't eat milk and meat, should they be respected and given an option, or they should be told to go to Beth Shalom? Or by the way, that's a polite way of saying go to blank, right? If you don't like it here, go to, exactly. So what should be done? I open up the floor, and then I will reveal what our actual temple policy is. We're looking for a few new voices here, or maybe if you've just shared one or two. Let's go with Joanne Hybe and then Stephen Hiller.
As someone who does not obey or follow the kosher rules outside of the temple, I see no reason to serve food in the temple that would offend anyone. That there are enough things you can serve that observe the rules without going crazy about it. But you don't need to serve pork. You don't need to serve shellfish. You don't need to serve milk with meat.
Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to take issue with the point made about the laws of Kashrut not being of tertiary importance, with one exception, and that is that very important is avoidance of cruelty to animals.
But that's not kosher. Cruelty, there's a number of mitzvot that prevent us from being cruel to animals that have nothing to do with eating them. So, not yoking two species, not a pack animal that is working in a mill can't be muzzled. You can't put an animal around food and not let it eat any of it. These are laws that have to do with cruelty of animals that are completely separate from kashrut. So I would agree with you that yes, these laws are more important than the dietary laws because they have to do with ethical issues.
Also, we feel, as you probably know, that there should always be a vegan option. Not that, everything should be vegan, but there should always be a vegan option. Otherwise, it excludes not only us, but many members of the temple who have become vegan for health reasons. The cruelty to animals.
Right, so vegan kind of skirts this. if you're going to have a vegan option, then you almost inherently have a kosher option for those.
That's also in respect of Tikkun Olam.
Yeah.
It's not only healthier for us, it's healthier for the environment and respects the lack of cruelty to the animals.
Right.
Yeah. All right. The Barry.
To say that many people, perhaps like me, grew up in a family household that kept kosher, but we ate out non-kosher. And my opinion is the temple is like my household. I would not want to see pork in the temple. It's like my house. But to go out and eat non-kosher is something I've been doing my whole life.
Yeah. And look, Barry, all I can say is the majority of Jews at our temple feel the way you do as well. That they don't keep, that they don't eat, they don't keep the kosher laws in their own personal choice of eating, but they don't want to come to temple and see shrimp and lobster or pork. It feels a defilement of the sacred space. The best comment I ever heard, by the way, just a sarcastic wit, was a rabbi who said, to all Jews, who keep a kosher home but eat out, at least the kitchen's going to heaven. I just thought that was such a great, such a funny line of sarcastic, sardonic wit. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to close the session and show you what our kosher policy is at Temple. This is it from 2007. It hangs in our kitchen. This food policy of Temple Emanu-El applies to all temple functions on-site or off-site. All right, that includes brotherhood. If you're going to the bowling alley, on-site and off-site, and it applies to all non-temple functions at temple. There shall be no pork or shellfish. There shall be provisions made for those who do not mix milk and meat. The temple recommends that milk and meat not be served in the same dish. Now, of course, everybody here who has a little bit of sophistication and law and knows about any and Congress and drafting knows that was the grand compromise word. There were two camps. The majority had no problem with milk and meat being served, but there was an adamant minority that felt that it's improper. So for their sake, the word recommended is there, but any event and any event chair is free to serve milk and meat in the same dish, i.e., beef and cheese, lasagna, if they wish. But if you do serve beef and cheese lasagna, you have to have a vegetarian lasagna next to it, or today, a vegan one for those who are vegan, because, to be proper hosts. But the point is, to follow the kosher law, you have to have an option that does not mix milk and meat. And it reminds me of the table and the debate between Hillel and Shammai, is that the buffet table can have multiple things on it. And as long as you allow the individual Jew to choose what they want to choose, I thought it's an interesting echo of that Mishnah. But ultimately, the vast majority of our members then and now did not want to see pork and shellfish at their temple. And friends, that is the conclusion of today's program. You're welcome to stick around for a minute if you want. And that is the overview on the laws. I'll get to some of the comments and questions in the chat. I wasn't able to during our session, but I will now in the after. Thank you, Judith Koziel, and thank you, our Adult Education Committee.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It was a wonderful program.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Learned a
Oh,
lot.
wait, let me take a quick picture. Guys, everybody smile to the camera, and I'm going to take a quick picture. And again, okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And
much.
you're welcome to stick around if you have any after questions.
I would, okay. I would like to let everybody know that at Passover.
Barry, I got to cut you off, Barry. I'm sorry. We got to give other people a chance. Betty Crane.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about the broccoli that you mentioned at Aviva, because it is a senior residence. And I know that when my mother was in a nursing home, broccoli was a wonderful vegetable to have because it's loaded with calcium and vitamin K. And it disturbs me that there is that issue with the younger Jewish rabbis. You have senior residents there who need to eat healthily.
Look, what can I say? I'm on team broccoli as well.
Okay, good.
I don't think I hid that very well.
Yeah.
You know, it frustrates me.
There,
you know, but so I'm on team broccoli as well. Yeah, Rob.
there is Rabbi.
Yes, Roz.
There is a way, I understand, if it's soaked with like vinegar or salt water or something, so that, and for a few minutes, so that all the bugs will end up floating to the top.
Really?
Or something like that.
Does that solve the problem?
Well, look, by the way, this broccoli issue was like from 5 years ago. I don't even know if it's still there. I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know if they're currently serving broccoli or not at Aviva. I just thought that's a nice, juicy topic to bring up, even if it's not current. Lita Katzer, it's your turn.
A friend sent me an article that plant-based beef, the artificial beef, plant-based chicken, rabbis have been certifying those as kosher, but now they have, I guess, perfected plant-based pork, and they are not having an easy time finding a rabbi to certify kosher because several of the rabbis said that's like crossing a line, even though it's not really pork, it still says pork.
Well, I think the more intriguing issue is the lab created meat. So I don't know if they're not yet able to mass market this, but they are able to create meat from and meat tissue that's grown entirely from a lab from stem cells. And they are, you know, and they're making pots full. What they're not yet making is factories full. And this is meat that has never been a living animal. It's alive in that the cells are alive, but it's never been a sentient animal. And the question is this, can this meat produced this way be kosher? And is it considered meat? And what if you do it from pig cells? So that's gonna be the much more complex things. And already some of the rabbis, particularly in Israel and New York, are starting to weigh in on it because the technology is there, it's just not yet mass produced. But do you understand what I'm saying? They take stem, I mean, it would be a great thing if you can mass produce beef this way without slaughtering animals, without using, you know, all of the waste and the water and so forth. It's environmentally catastrophic, our beef production currently. This could be a wonderful thing. The question is, would it be kosher? Would, you know, if you can make lab created meat. Steve, is that your hand up? Your first comment?
Wouldn't we be very easy to classify that not as beef? I mean, just classify it as, you know, it's a lab produced product. It's got nothing to do with being kosher, non-kosher from a meat standpoint. It's just another new product. It bypasses biblical notice.
Yeah, I wish I can remember. It was about 5 or 6 years ago, we devoted a lunch with the rabbi to this because an Israeli company was developing this and they needed to try to get certifications. And so they were pushing the envelope on this. And let me see if I can find that information. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But you know, because the company wants to argue that it's not beef, but at the same time, they want to market it as beef. You know, the consumer doesn't want to buy it unless it's called beef. So it's like, that's the dilemma that they're up against.
I'm happy to buy it as meat-like.
Meat-like. Nigel, your turn, and then Barry.
One quick question, quick statement. My dad, who I think was a very wise man who grew up in a kosher home, we kept kosher, always used to say, there's nothing wrong with a little trafe of flesh now and then. That was his words of wisdom.
Nothing wrong with a little trafe, what?
Little trafe of flesh. And I don't know if he's
trafe of
referring to
flesh.
food, kosher if they're not, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop recording for a moment.